So welcome to Exploring the Power of Math Language Routines. This is the next in our series of CCRS support webinars. We're excited to dive into both numeracy and language today. I am Lindsay Poost. I'm the Atlas Numeracy and Special Projects Coordinator, and I am joined by Matt Damer, teacher extraordinaire up north in Moorhead. So Matt, if you want to actually wave or something, turn your camera on, say hi, you can.
Hello, hello all.
Awesome. All right, so before we jump in, we have an icebreaker question. So in the chat, name an activity that you've done recently that required both reading skills and the application of number sense. So I can give an example. Doubling a recipe, right? Like I need to read the recipe to know what to do with the ingredients, but if I have to double it, I'm also using some number sense to make sure measurements and ratios and whatnot are the same. So that's an example, doubling a recipe. What else have you done recently that required both reading and number sense? Any ideas? I'll give you a moment to put your answers in the chat. I see some people looking down. I think we're typing. Yeah, reading a menu and prices. It's good. What else? Medicine dosage, calculating CEUs and dealing with relicensing. Yes. Reading a chart, but being able to understand how to convert numbers into words in order to answer the question. Yep. Reading my energy bill, telling how much time expired between two appointments, taxes. Oh, yes. Thank you for the reminder. Reading a paycheck stub. So there's lots. Like if we turn on the news, we have to have number sense, how to interpret data, right? We get statistics thrown at us all the time, but being able to critically ask what that means and how do I interpret that and what does that mean for my reaction? Yeah, it's all around us. So thank you for all of those examples. Way more than I thought of. I that's funny, Christine. Okay, so today we are going to experience a 3 reads routine. This is a math language routine, and there are 8 of them, and we will eventually share 8 of them with you in a resource for you to take with you and look at, but we're going to focus on one of those today and kind of talk about what is it, how would I use it, how does it bring language and numeracy together? So we'll look at that routine first, and then you'll have time to be the student and kind of practice with that routine with a word problem. Then we'll hear from Matt Damer, who will then give us some insights and talk about how he's used this in his instructional setting, how he's adapted it for his classroom. And then we'll do some reflection and wrap up at the end. So the description kind of outlined this, but we really want to continue to deepen our understanding of the importance of language comprehension in the math classroom. Experience a math language routine ourselves and then discuss its relevance because we all have different teaching contexts. So as we're doing this, think, how could I adapt this? If I can't use this as is, how could I adapt this? And then, of course, connecting with colleagues, including Matt, around this topic. So we will jump in. The next slide, I'm going to warn you, you are going to see a lot of text on the next slide, but I'm going to give you a couple minutes to read it on your own. And as you read it, think about this question in green. What do you notice? What do you wonder? There's no right or wrong answer, but if you have something that you would like to share, please put it in the chat. What do you notice as you're reading this? What questions do you have as you're reading this? So I'll be quiet for a couple minutes. All right. If there's anything that stands out to you as you're reading this, feel free to put it in the chat. Yes, this strategy does encourage this. It takes the emphasis away from the solution, right? And gives us a process for asking multiple questions, doing, reading something multiple times. So yeah, that's good. Yes, it's a close reading with a different purpose for each read, just like in ELA, right? So there's this nice overlap between math and ELA routines, right? That we can use in both classrooms or incorporate numeracy into our ELA or ELA into our numeracy. Uses parallel language to ELA comprehension. Awesome. You're right. The questions in this one at the top in the what section, for this, the way that this routine is outlined, it doesn't say, what is the question asking? It's really looking at other things to analyze first before trying to solve anything. Good. Okay. So my next question for you, and if there's other things that you're in the middle of typing, please keep them coming. But what connections do you see, and you already started talking about it, to CCRS? As you're reading this, what stands out to you as, that's really CCRS language, whether it's for ELA or math or both? What stands out to you as meeting the standards? Understanding and paraphrasing. Mathematical conversation is learning and practicing academic language. Yes, there's a lot of language in math. Restating, paraphrasing. And I'm curious, because I didn't ask this question beforehand, but how many of you identify as an ELA teacher or ESL, as a math teacher, or as both? Like, I teach everything. Like, if you could just quick put that in the chat. I didn't ask that, but I'm curious now. How do you identify? Okay, math, both. Who else do we have in the room? Yes. Okay, teach everything, both. Yeah, so there's a lot of us that have overlap, but then there's also some that Maybe we are more math or more ESL, ELA. Good, thank you. That is helpful to know. And so it's even more important, I think, too, regardless of what we what we're teaching or what our main focus of our class is, to keep exploring the connection between language and numeracy can be powerful for those classes where we do have a lot of overlap in what we're teaching, and just incorporating these practices no matter what the focus of the study is for that student at any given moment. But I think it's also good for us, if we specialize, to realize I'm a math teacher. Wow, there's a lot of language that I could bring in to help, language support that I could bring in, or I'm a language teacher. I could actually help and bring in some numeracy understanding and support to help students critically read a graph or something. So there's a lot of overlap. So I think this is helpful. There were a few things that Matt and I just agreed that, like, these things seemed pretty explicit in the 3 reads. There could be more, but as far as direct connections to the standards in ELA, reading anchor 1 and reading anchor 4, reading closely to determine what is the text saying, and then having to make inferences from it so that I can do something with that information. And then there can be a lot of domain specific words in math problems, or unique meanings depending on the context. And then in math, some math practices, making sense of problems, persevering in solving them, right? This is a process. Like, I think it was Natalie who pointed that out. I could be wrong, but it's a process. It's not just like, get the solution, right? Being able to reason abstractly and quantitatively, construct viable arguments, critique the reasoning of others. If this is done in a small group, you can talk to each other, right? Well, what do you think this situation is about? Or if it's a one-on-one tutoring session that you have, or you're working with 1 or 2 students, it can be a conversation between you and that student, but they can still be constructing those arguments and critiquing your reasoning, and then being precise, attending to precision. So those are some explicit connections we wanted to make before jumping in. Any comments, questions so far about the setup, about this routine? We're going to give you a math problem in a minute to practice reading it 3 times. But any questions or comments before we move on? Okay. If you do have something, or if you're typing it, keep typing it, we'll back up. But otherwise, we'll move on to being the student. And you are going to get a chance to be in a breakout room shortly. It's going to take me a few minutes to set this up, so bear with me, but I'm hoping to avoid any confusion about how we're going to set this up. So I'm going to take a little time to explain it. You are all going to see a grid like this, where you have first read, second read, third read, and then you have those questions that we just read in that paragraph. And so this is just a preview, right? The word problem is not there yet, but this is what we'll all be working with. And we're going to give you options. There's 2 groups to choose from. One, I'll get to that in a moment, sorry. Regardless of the group, you're all going to read through the problem we give you, and then either talk about it or record your thoughts for this column, okay? And then you're going to read through it a second time, and then you're going to just focus on this column. And what is this question? How would I answer this as a student? And then wrong way. Okay. And then you'd read it a third time and do the same thing. And I'm emphasizing that because for me, it can be easy to be like, oh, I don't need to read it 3 times, like whatever, I get it. But because we really want to experience it like the students would, I want us all to actually read this 3 times, even if it seems repetitive, and look for a different question each time. So reading the question first is always a good idea. What am I looking for this time? Okay, what am I looking for the next time, etc., so that you have that in mind and gives you a purpose while reading. But I do want groups to read it 3 times to focus on these questions separately. You'll see an or. I just tried to give different words because sometimes a question doesn't make sense at first. So I tried to write it in a little bit more plain language, but they're the same question, just so you know. So the options. If you love Jamboard and you're like, yes, please bring on all of the tech, you can choose a Jamboard group. And then you can access that. We will put the link in the chat, and then you can designate one person to share their screen if you'd like, or you can just all look at it. But the problem is there, and the grid. So if you love working in Jamboard, this is for you. We are only going to do one group today, so it doesn't matter which one you use, but there's a situation. This is what you're reading. This is the word problem, and everybody will have the same thing. And then here is where you can add the notes that your group talks about. Okay, so you're going to do this as a group. If you're like, please, no more technology, then you can choose the verbal group, and all you have to do is talk about it. So there'll be a co-host, they'll project it on the screen, and you'll just talk about the problem. You don't have to record anything. So you're going to have 15 minutes to work on this in your groups. There'll be a 1-minute countdown, so you don't have to come back right away. But before we go, are there any questions or confusion about the choice that you're going to have in just a moment and how this is going to work? Yes, Christine.
Okay, so I know I'm going to be projecting my slide, and how will people see the problem? Can you repeat that again?
Yes, good question. So you are going to see the problem because the problem will be on the slide that you project and these 3 questions.
Perfect. I did not close read the
No,
slide.
that's okay. That's okay. So yeah, on the Jamboard, they are on separate slides, but if you're like, I don't want to deal with tech today, then you can choose the verbal group and everything will be on one screen.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Yep. Okay. Well, then we will get started. So you'll see in a moment a choice between Jamboard or verbal. And if you don't, just private message, or not private message us, just put it in the chat like, I don't see an option, and we'll make sure you get where you want to go.
If anyone needs help, just say where you want to go and I can put you there. This is Gail.
Oh, hi, this is Martha Hotchkiss. I stepped away for a moment. I want to go to the verbal group, please.
Okay, I'll put you there, Martha.
Thank you.
Cynthia Wood, it's looks like you're not, you want the verbal group. All right, and just be aware when you're messaging me directly, which is fine, I can help you out, but you'll have to use the drop down if you want to message the whole group, but I will put you in the verbal group. And Ralu, I don't know if you stepped away, if you're still with us. Did you have a Jamboard or verbal?
She,
Nope, she jumped
but
already.
verbal.
Okay,
Yep.
all right, got it.
I put her in verbal.
All
She had-
right, I think we're all there. Lindsay, are you going to go to a group or are you going to? You're muted, hon.
I will pop around,
Okay.
kind of eavesdrop, and then,
Sure.
do we want to, maybe we already did, pause the recording? All right, welcome back. I hope that was somewhat fun or a lot of fun to get to kind of dive into a word problem and go through the different questions for the 3 reads routine. So you can type in the chat, you can raise your hand to unmute and share your thoughts either way. But my first reflection question, because now I want to reflect a little bit on what that was like, was just, what was your experience with that? And a follow-up question can be, what CCRS connections did you notice as you worked through the problem? So you can answer one or both of those, but if you have something you want to share, yes, you will get the slides after the webinar. And I will have a link as well. There is a read-only link to the Jamboard, so it won't be changed, but you'll have that also linked in the slides to see what other people worked on. So yes, Christine, your hand is up.
Yeah, that was really interesting to me. I can just the CCRS connection. One of the things I brought up was that first read and explaining the situation. That's the same thing that we do when we use a piece of text and we create a set of text dependent questions. The very first question or two usually are about the students demonstrating they understand the gist, you know. So, but Ralu brought up, you know, she jumped because Ralu's mind is always going. She had a good point about the students, you know, looking at the numbers and kind of jumping ahead. So I was thinking about the rationale to give students when the students say, what do we, you know, why are we reading this 3 times? Or why do we know why they're reading it 3 times. I said that my students often, when they're working on word problems, they glance over and they look at the numbers, they don't look at the words in between, they don't really read the problem. But what rationale for students when they want to jump ahead, like why this is actually a really good strategy and why the strategy would really pay off. So I was thinking a lot about that rationale piece and showing how relevant it is to what students want to do.
Yeah, I love that, because I still want to jump ahead sometimes. I'm like, I just want to solve it. But I don't know if you've all experienced this, but even though I know to slow down, there are plenty of times that I still jump ahead and then I end up answering the question that I think they're asking me, but they're not actually asking me that question. And so, so that I think too, like sharing your experience as a teacher, like, yeah, like I want to make sure that I actually understand what they want me to do and what information I have, because I think we can all relate to answering what we think they're saying instead of what's actually on the paper. Yep, exactly. Skimming and scanning is useful, but it doesn't work when we need to take in all the info. Anybody else want to share your experience with 3 reads, what it felt like? Maybe it wasn't like, maybe it was hard to force yourself to read it 3 times. Like, that's fair. Just like Christine was saying, slowing down is hard. Any thoughts are welcome. Yes, using the word problem solving process that's taught in elementary school, looking at questions first, restating in your own words, that is just such an important step, right? Then go back and underline and pick what info you need. maybe there's unnecessary info. Yeah, I agree with you that I don't think students would want to read it 3 times. I think if a problem was I think, yeah, there's that. I'm hesitating because I think that there's still that value that we know, like Christine was saying, like we know there's value in slowing down and having a purpose, and how can I answer this question so that I don't miss anything, and training our brains through doing that, I do need to slow down and pay attention to what's there. So yeah, students may not want to. I know my students wouldn't always want to, but I think really selling the relevancy of it and how it can work. I want to pull up the Jamboard. Now, everything is anonymous in here. I don't know who wrote what. So this is, I'm not like I'm gonna point out some stuff, but I'm not gonna pick on anybody because I have no idea who wrote what. Yes, I like what you put in the chat too, Christine. Asking students to reflect on when it could be useful is a good idea, just so they have practice that they could use this when they need to. Okay, so a few things that I wrote down that I wanted to make sure to note, and then if there's anything from the verbal group that you want to share as well, please do, Christine or Matt. But when we are looking at this situation, I absolutely love this comment, this one right here, and I'll make it bigger. I'm so glad someone wrote this. I don't know who you are, and you don't need to out yourself if you don't want to, but does the situation actually give this as something we need to determine? What we read, does it tell us what we need to determine? No, you're right, it doesn't. It's so quick for me to do this. So this is one way of pointing out why it can be helpful to practice this strategy, even if we're not using it every single time, because what is the information that's there, right? And so they don't ask me a question, but I'm so used to being asked a question that I kind of fill it in right before I'm done. And so this one doesn't have a question with it. It's just a bunch of information. There's a situation, right? So I wanted to point that out. And so I'm so glad. It's almost like I planted someone. I'm so glad that happened. When we're encouraging our students to write down the situation, right? Again, if we are asking them to write phrases, that's fine, but maybe you have another goal in the class and you want them to write a full sentence, right? So there can be that intentional language practice as well, putting into a sentence what this is about, or you can have them write down phrases. And so it just depends on what your teaching goals are. But I would, as I'm teaching students how to do this, I would encourage them to not use any kind of numbers at all. Just kind of getting, I like that Christine brought up the word the gist, right? What is the gist? They're talking about apartment buildings that are in a building and they're rented at different rates, right? It's about rental rates. And so they're talking about 1 and 2 bedroom apartments that are rented, right? And I don't even have to put the total number. And so then that first purpose, that first read would be, what is this about without numbers? And then, because we are so quick to take numbers and plug them in and do something that maybe we're not asked to do. And then that second read, right? I see a lot of really good notes about, well, what can we count? What can be measured? What did we see? And I think in this stage, I would really encourage students to make sure to label anything. So I see like 12 units, that's labeled, that's awesome. Because the 12 is not dollars, the 12 is units, 12 units. And then when we have 360, I would encourage students to put a $sign or something, so that, or saying that it's, you know, an amount or something where it's very clear that we're getting used to putting numbers and units together so that I know what it stands for. And it's not just this, I think some people call them naked numbers, but that it has meaning to it. So helping students with that. And then this third, the last thing I wanted to point out
Hey, Lindsay,
is, yes,
can I jump in here?
please do. I was like, is someone talking?
Yeah.
I need to turn up my volume.
On the second read, one other thing that I feel like in this step, the pulling of those numbers out and kind of just separating them out to, you know, here's my number, my label, all of that. But when they do eventually get to the point where they're going to go back to the problem and figure out what is this asking me to do, I think they're going to be in a lot better place to sort out what do I need and what don't I need. If they really understand at this point now, they're really, they're getting a better idea of the context. And now we've got all of these numbers and how they work with that context. So when they're then asked, you know, to figure something out, I think the sorting out of what is relevant and what is necessary and what is extra will be a lot easier.
Mhm. And that's exactly what should be our selling point for having them do 3 reads. And explain that, okay, in the first read, we're focusing on the words. The second read, we're focusing on the numbers. And then by writing them and kind of changing, instead of unit, it says 12 apartments. And then just only listing that, right?
I love that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I agree. I think it came up a little bit ago where this process is slow. It's very slow, and we always want to rush through. Our students always want to rush through, and it can be a hard sell. But I put in the chat that as they get used to it, it will speed up. They will be able to, I mean, almost when they first look at that question, they'll be doing that first read already. And then they'll go back to it and they'll get in the habit of it, and the process will speed up for them. But you're absolutely right in saying that that first few times through this, it's going to feel clunky. It's going to feel slow. And it's kind of just pushing them through that a little is going to be necessary. But it does get better. I've seen it get better, at least with my students. So.
Thank you for sharing that, Matt. It's very helpful to have your experience. And I know we get to hear from you more, which I'm excited about because, yeah, seeing how students have responded, and that maybe at first it's slow, but it does become more internalized, which is the point that then they can pull this strategy out and do it more quickly, but effectively. It's good to have those examples and testimonies of it actually working. I will just point out one more thing here, and that is, here we go. I think this part this sticky could be moved here. What math questions could we ask? How many of each type of apartment are rented at this time? The other thing I wanted to point out is the practice of writing questions. I think 1 is a great language skill. Sentence structure changes some, right? But 2, as students come up with their own questions, what could I do with these numbers? Then it's easier to interpret questions when they're asked of you. So many of these sticky notes are actually the question that I took off. It is related to the question that I took off of this problem that we're going to see in just a moment. So it's like you already came up with the question, but now it's yours, which is helpful. And so, and then I also I love this question too. What's the average cost, right? There's a lot of math you can do that your students will then have ownership over because they came up with the questions, and you can have fun figuring out different things. And that is a great question, Martha. I'm going to let Matt answer that.
Yeah, I think I'm not going to answer that right now. I will answer that a little bit later, because I do kind of go into that and how, you know, I've adapted this routine for my classroom. So I will get to that in a little bit, but thank you for bringing that up, Martha.
And so I will keep going so that we get to Matt, because everybody wants to hear from Matt, which is great. So let's see here. I have two other questions that if you have comments for, you can put in the chat. If there's anything else that you haven't said yet, what benefits or challenges you foresee using this with your students, and thinking too about how this could help not just ELL students, but also native English speakers, right? So if you have any comments that you want to share around those two questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I am going to go on and just show one more example of how you could actually modify this routine. But I'd be curious if you have anything else to add to the benefits challenges conversation, or how this can help all students, right? If you have thoughts there that you want to share. There are different ways that you could structure these problems. The first one that we did is kind of the traditional way that this routine was written, where the question is removed. But depending on what you want to work on with your students, you could give them the whole problem and the question could be there. So now you see that in purple at the bottom. And this first part is the same. The second part is pretty much the same. What numbers do you see? What do they mean, right? Understanding the problem. And now the question, though, is part of that as well. So that would be a little bit of a difference. The question can help drive some of what your comments are in the second read. This last way is the most different. Okay, my third purpose for reading, can I think of possible solution methods? But another way to ask that would be, or to say that would be, think about 2 or 3 ways to find the answer. That's different than go ahead, solve it right now, right? So thinking about 2 or 3 ways to find the answer, trying to push students to, can we think about how we would solve this before jumping into a solution method, because then it's forcing conversation, whether it's between you and the student or students together, but also helping us think more flexibly that there may be more than one way to figure this out, right? Maybe I make a table and I am going to do trial and error and just record. If I have one bedroom and 11 2 bedrooms, this is how much it would be. If I have 2 1 bedrooms and 10 2 bedrooms, this is how much it would be. And I just go until I get a price that matches the total, right? So if my students aren't used to setting up equations yet, you could still, trial and error, figure out what the answer is, or you could set up equations, but there's not just one way. So encouraging that talk, encouraging that flexible thinking. And then the last way is actually completely different. And again, you're going to get these slides, so you'll get to go back and look at this, but where you would focus, so maybe this is for those GED level students that are ready for jumping more into the abstract, but needing some help getting started with a problem. What are the numbers? What are the unknowns? Make a list of them. Okay, then just like we've been doing, tell me what it means, what each of those mean. And now, okay, can we put those numbers and symbols together into some kind of relationship and write a math sentence? So just an example would, for this one, these are all my numbers and I have a question mark because I don't know what number it is, but if I'm not comfortable with letters yet, use a question, or I could use N or X or whatever. And then next to it, writing down, like Matt was saying, what do each mean? Because this is going to help me when I have to put these things together into some kind of relationship. What do I need and where do I need it? Maybe what don't I need? And then thinking how it would fit together. And so maybe you start off with a sentence. The total amount when all units are rented is the same as, okay, 450 times the number of 2 bedrooms plus 360 times the number of 1 bedrooms. And that may be where students end, or they may continue and write it in an algebraic equation. So this part, the purpose of today wasn't to solve this problem, but just to kind of show you, like, you could actually vary the different levels and different abstractness of it, but still try to give, depending on the level of your students, but still giving students a concrete strategy to try to work through what information they're seeing when they're working with these word problems. And it's a great way to talk about vocab in all 3 of these stages that students may not be comfortable with. So I am gonna stop talking now and turn it over to Matt, and we can hear more from him about how he has used this in his classroom.
All right. Sorry about that. I was muted for a second. I just wanted to, I guess, first of all, I will start out by saying that, I'm an ABE teacher in Moorhead, as Lindsay mentioned. And I work with students in our ABE levels all the way from 2 to 6. So I'm kind of working with a very wide range of levels. And so when I was first introduced to this routine, I automatically started thinking, okay, how can I adapt this? Well, first of all, how can I use this? And then do I need to adapt it? And I kind of decided that I did need to adapt it. And I'll give you a little context to start out with, is that I am no longer teaching necessarily in just a leveled math class, as this routine it appears to be designed for. You would get their students in groups, and they would work on this, and they would use this routine with a problem, and they would talk about it with their classmates and all that. Typically, my situation is a little different now. We hired a teacher who is trained in teaching math, and so I'm trained in English. So I was able to kind of step away from a lot of the more formal math teaching. However, our classroom is, and you can go ahead to the next slide there. Our classroom, I like to call it a modified one-room schoolhouse, because it does have at certain times it has elements of that one-room schoolhouse. We are in a situation where we have some leveled classes happening where students are pulled out in certain level groups, and they are going through class that way. We also have some classes that are pulled out that are multi-level, and that would be more of your traditional one-room schoolhouse class setup. But we also have a lot of students who are coming in and doing more of an independent study style, and that is where I really saw this one. That's where I'm exposed most to math, at this time. We have a lot of students who they may participate in one leveled class here, and another one there. However, then they're also going to go and they have their student work folder, and they're working on stuff on their own. And it is much more of an independent study style learning environment at that time. And so every single day I am working with students who are working on math. It's just not necessarily in a strict formal math class. So, and often our students are working on word problems, and that is where I really focus this routine, is when students, whether they're starting with a new aspect of math, and they're starting to work through it, and then they come to a word problem, and they're like, whoa, wait, how do I do this? Or they're just stuck on a word problem. I will pull this routine out and say, all right, this is the strategy that I want you to use to tackle that. I think oftentimes our students, as we've already talked about, they get stuck with word problems because they try to jump ahead. They try and rush. They're so used to, they see the problem with the numbers. Okay, I just solve it. And they get to a word problem and they're like, I'm just going to grab those numbers and I'm going to solve it. And oftentimes they skip right over what is being asked. And so I'm always trying to look for ways to slow them down. And when I saw this routine, I thought this is a really good way to do that, to slow them down. When I go to the next slide there, this is an example problem that I just actually recently worked with a student. He was having trouble with this one. And so we kind of worked through it, and I had him work through using the 3 reads routine. And so I just kind of want to walk you through how that process went. The problem here, as you can read, every day, Jason has a 14-mile round trip drive to work. He then has to drive his truck on a 296-mile delivery route 5 days a week. How many miles does he drive each day? Okay. As we can see in reading that, there's some numbers. There's also some things we may not need. Okay. So if you want to jump to the next slide, I had the student read through the problem, and then we talked about what is this situation. The student said, Jason is going to work, he's driving his truck. So then I kind of took that and asked some follow-up questions to better bring the student into this situation and bring them into the context. What does Jason do for work? So we need to go back and we need to look through, okay, well, the student said, he drives his truck on a delivery route. Okay, so then does this mean that Jason drives to work and drives while he's at work? And this one, the student thought about for a little while and then eventually said yes, but I knew down the road they were going to need to differentiate between the time spent driving to and from work and the time spent driving while at work. So I wanted to bring that in right at the beginning. And then, what does round trip mean? And this is where we, in our breakout room, we really talked about during this first read, addressing any vocabulary, and this is kind of a term that may be new to someone, but they're going to have to understand it to solve this problem. If they don't understand what a round trip means, they're really going to struggle with trying to figure out how much time it's just not going to work for them. So we addressed that there. And then also, what do you think it means? I asked as far as round trip. The student wasn't sure what it meant. So then what do you think it means? And then we kind of discussed what it really does mean, what that term, and tried to keep that. I'm great at going off on tangents when I'm teaching. So I tried to keep that as close to the problem and then and then we kind of moved on to our second read. So if you want to go to the next slide, the second read, we read through it again. And then we looked at what can be counted or measured in this situation. And so the student started looking through and saying, okay, well, there's the miles to work. Those can be counted. There's the miles to home. Okay. And then there's also, obviously, there's the 296 miles, 5 days, and then 14 miles is included as well. Oh, I wanted to point out, as we talked about earlier, we're keeping those labels with those numbers because we're going to need those, and we don't want those to get lost. We want to keep those labels, at least that's what I feel, is that we want to keep those labels with the numbers throughout the entire process, because it can be a little confusing if we then have to go back later and try and pair those back up. So I like to have the students keep their labels with the whole time. So we went through, just kind of weeded through those, and then yeah, we moved on to our third read. What mathematical questions can we ask? And we read through the problem, and then these are the questions that the student came up with. He said, how many miles does Jason live from his work? How many total miles each day does Jason drive? And then each week as well. We could figure out month, year, all of those. How many miles each week does Jason drive for his delivery route? Okay, that's going to be different. And I was really glad when I saw that he came up with this question, because then I knew that he was understanding that there's two separate driving situations happening each day. He's driving to and from work, but he's also driving while he's there. And we can separate out and measure those separately as well as together. All right, you want to go to the next slide there? So then once we had gone through all of those reads, and once we go through those, then we will go back to the question in the original problem. What is being asked here? How many miles does he drive each day? Okay. And then I said, does this sound similar to any of the questions that you created? He kind of looked back and said, yeah, it actually is similar to it's really the same question. I just put it in my own words. So, and then do we have the information? Now that we have the context nailed down, we understand the situation, we're understanding all of the number units that are included, how they work together. Now we're really going to dig into solving the problem. So this is where we kind of went back and said, okay, do we have everything we need to solve this? Now we're looking at the question, do we have everything we need? And then if so, what are those things that we're going to need? And then we can pull those aside and we can get rid of everything else. And that's how we would move forward with solving the question. So this is kind of how I use this. And generally at this point, I am using this one-on-one with students. However, I envision this could easily be done as a daily routine at the start of a class, or if you have students coming in, some who are just happen to be working on math, they could come in. This could be a warm-up activity, just as much as something that they use for every word problem. Eventually that would be really nice, but like we talked about, this is something that it can be slow. And so one way you may want to use this is, instead of using this for every word problem, this could be how they warm up for math every day. But it's getting them to slow down. And I think once they go through it a few times and see that they're understanding the context and the problem and everything, a lot better than they were in the past, I think selling it will be a lot easier. And they may even just start using it or pieces of it as they go. I think that it was that I think that was, oh yeah. Some of the benefits that I see to this routine. Again, we've talked about this a lot, but it's slowing the learners down. They're taking the time, they're taking, it takes the learner out of the numbers and it brings them into the situation. We're not worrying about, in that first read, we're not worrying about those numbers. We're just looking at the situation. We're trying to understand the context of that problem. And then it provides opportunities to address new vocabulary. It provides a structured routine for tackling word problems. And that is what I have always seen students lacking, is that a tool for working with word problems during math. They may even do this naturally while they're reading and a piece of text, but when they're doing math, it's like something flips in their brain and they don't think that they need to do those same things, even though this is a word problem and it's a piece of text. And so we're going to kind of force them to use those same strategies, those same tools to slow down and go through it. And then I also think it provides an opportunity to think about mathematical questioning. And as Lindsay said, the more someone thinks about mathematical questions and the questioning, the structure of the questions, I think they get used to seeing that and thinking that way. When they come up to a question, they're much better prepared to understand what's being asked if they're in the practice of thinking through that questioning or the structure of that questioning. So yes, does anyone have any questions for me at all?
Yeah, feel free to raise your hand or put a question in the chat. And thank you for that comment, just reiterating that it is important to explain, we don't always need everything. It really is about context and that idea of mathematical reasoning, right? Math is not plug and chug, let me memorize. It's, I got to reason through this and think, what do I need?
We're still being haunted by those full sheets of problems where they're the timed work.
Yes. Oh man, you're right. Thank you for reminding me. Oh man. Yes, well, please feel free if there are questions that pop up and you think of them, throw them in the chat. Thank you so much, Matt, for sharing. I loved seeing the authentic student responses as you went through the routine. And the fact that you did it in a one-room schoolhouse setting, I think is awesome, because sometimes it's easy to see how I can do these routines in a large class and do small groups and this and that, but it can be really powerful working one-on-one with a student as well. So thank you. So we are going to move to a brief reflection period and then wrapping up for the day. We do want to share with you the resource, the full resource where this routine came from. So in the chat, you will see a link shortly that has 8 math language routines. That looks like this once my computer loads. There we go. So there are 8 math language routines, and for short, it's MLR1, MLR2, etc. We looked at the 3 reads, which was MLR6. And so this is where I got the text, the what is it and the why. But there are 8, and a lot of them actually like overlap in purpose and kind of setup. So you could combine some of these, I think. But I'm going to give you a few minutes to skim through this, okay? And then after a few minutes of skimming through this, I am going to ask you If there are other routines that you saw that seem either relevant or beneficial or useful, that you're like, ooh, I think I want to try that one in my classroom or in my lesson. Yeah, so that's kind of what I want you to think about. What other ones stand out to you? So we're going to give you a few minutes to kind of skim through those, and then we'll come back and reflect a little bit in a couple minutes.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
Yes, I received a question that I think it may have been for the group, but I'm on an iPad and I'm just all confused. So I'm sorry, I apologize. But the question I received from another participant says, do we, oh, hold on, I gotta go back to the, do we encourage writing equations?
Oh.
Which is a good question, because I don't always do that, because equation is the way that I learned, because I memorized. I did not go to school here. I went to school in a different country, and a lot was memorization, rote memorization. That's it, bum, bum, you know, I had to do it. I don't do that anymore. So this is a good question, if you have any answers to that.
Yeah. And then whoever wrote that, if you want to expand, please do. I will, my initial thoughts are, yes, we should be teaching equations, but the way we teach equations should be different than like you're explaining, just it being just memorize this and do this. I think the idea of the equal sign is something that no matter what level you're at, if you are working on addition facts with students, or you are working on like that apartment problem where I have ends and multiplication symbols and all of that, understanding what the equal sign means, that it's the same value on each side, that is something that really a lot of students lack. Not everyone, but a lot of students lack that understanding of that. So I think that is huge to have a conversation about. And then one tip off the top of my head, and I can keep thinking about this too and email the group after, but one tip that I have is writing it in like word sentences. What am I doing? Like, what if I'm saying this plus this equals this, what am I adding up? Can I explain to you why the 4,950 is on this side of the equation and the other things are on this side of the equation? Can I tell you, oh, this is the total amount of both of those amounts added up together? So I think really trying to get at the understanding behind the equation so that it's not just rote memorization and memorizing keywords. It says sum, put a plus sign, like really understanding that context so that I can build something, I think is important. And then I have to know where the equal sign goes. And to do that, I need to know the meaning of it. And so I think there are ways to do that, even at lower levels of math. But I wouldn't separate it from the meaning, but I wouldn't cut it out, because otherwise students, when they encounter it, they later on in more formal problems for GED, it's going to be really hard to make that abstract step if they're not used to thinking about and seeing symbols and what they might mean. So those are my thoughts, not a whole lot of strategies, but I can also follow up in an email too to people who are on here with some resources. And if anybody else has, yes, Singapore math is amazing. I love Singapore math, because if I can represent what these numbers mean and how they fit together, am I taking one away? Am I putting two together? Am I repeating one multiple times? Like, can I draw it out? Can I visually show you what's happening with these numbers? It's going to make equations a lot easier. So I agree. I think we need to teach it, but do it differently than we were taught. So Singapore math is one way to explore. And I can also follow up with other resources as well of how to teach equations with meaning. If anybody else has any resources that you want to put in the chat as well, comments to that question, please put it in there. I certainly don't have all the answers, but I do believe it is important that we are teaching. Did anybody have a chance to open that document and look at any of the other routines? It's okay if not, just wondering if any other ones stood out to you.
I like the critique one. Of course, I'm just doing more of ALA than math, but it is a good, they analyze, reflect, and develop, and it's a different approach of looking at a word problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are so many rich suggestions in here that give us different ways of approaching what we've already been doing. Mm-hmm. And having students involved in that critique, right? Like, here's the first draft, but now what could we do to improve? I think, yeah, it's invaluable, those conversations. Any others anybody wants to share that stand out to you as useful or something you might want to try? Yes, the everyday language for the why is very helpful. Mm-hmm. Yes. And are you talking about the why in general for the problem? That's where my mind went. Or are you talking about the why for one of these?
I'm sorry, was that a question to me?
Denise, yes.
Oh, Denise, okay.
The why. I'm
Sorry.
reading the chat and doing, I'm sorry, I'm doing two things at once here. The why for math problems and the why for basic comprehension. Yeah, I think relevance is always important, but I think especially for adults, we all know that answering that why and having some reason why this is important is essential. So this resource you can use. Gail also is going to put one more resource that we're not going to talk about today, but I want you to have, is the background. Where did these even come from? So there's a link that she'll share if you're interested in where these routines were thought up and why. So you will have that. And that will be linked to the slides as well, along with this list of routines. And then Matt, I don't want to miss your question. The co-crafting question one again gets at the language of math questioning, which is always beneficial. Yes, exactly. Understanding the question. Are there ways that we can help students with that? And if they're involved with crafting them, it's going to be easier to understand them when they're being asked of students later. Awesome. Okay, well, thank you for sharing. And if you have any other comments, feel free to put them in the chat. Otherwise, I will just go over a few announcements before we close here. Lots of upcoming events. lots and lots. So next week already is language and literacy. And I have to give a shout out to a presentation I'm doing with Megan Himes. We are doing a session on Thursday morning about some other strategies besides these math language routines for helping students with comprehending language in the math classroom. So there will be additional strategies there on Thursday morning. So I have to give a shout out. But yes, if you have not registered yet, the link is in the chat. And then February 18th, we have the Every Webinar series. Marn Frank is leading those. My understanding is there are 6 of them. You can come to all or you can come to one, but it starts in February and I believe ends in May or April. So different dates to check out. And that link is in the chat. February 24th, we have our last CCRS support webinar of the year. Mark Truszkowski is going to be here to talk about building inquiry in both ELA and math and what that looks like in both subjects. So we're going to get another cross-content webinar. And then March 3rd, we have a specific math content webinar coming up on proportional reasoning and how that even makes sense and kind of diving into the understanding behind it instead of just thinking of cross multiply and divide. And so we have a speaker, Sarah Longberg-Liu from Massachusetts, who works with Sabes and Turk, and she she does different national speaking engagements, but she's great and she has some awesome insights and activities for us to work through so that we can then help our students. We get to experience it and then we can help our students. April 22nd, save the date, virtual statewide conference. And that is in lieu of many regionals, I think all, but at least most regionals. And then April 30th is the Minnesota Council for Teachers of Mathematics conference. So if you've attended, I know Atlas has sponsored many ABE teachers to go in years past, and we are able to do that again. So in the chat, you have the link to the scholarship and the information, and also you will have it linked on this slide when you receive the slides tomorrow. But we are able to provide scholarships to help with travel and registration costs to attend that math conference. So, and as of right now, it is going to be in person, a one-day conference on a Saturday in person as of now. So anyways, lots of things here. That's what we have. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, we'll stick around for a few minutes. Feel free to email us. But otherwise, enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. And thank